This story is presented as a dramatized television moment, a hypothetical clash imagined by commentators and fans, not a confirmed real-world event. In this version, Leanne Morgan walks onto the set of The View with her familiar warmth and southern humor, expecting a light conversation. The audience senses energy in the room, the kind that often precedes uncomfortable honesty. Smiles are exchanged, polite jokes land, but beneath the surface there is tension, as if everyone knows that something sharper than comedy is about to cut through the studio air. As the conversation moves from stand-up comedy to culture, the tone subtly shifts. Leanne speaks about family values, humor rooted in everyday life, and respecting people even when you disagree. Joy Behar listens, nodding at first, but soon begins to challenge Leanne's phrasing. What starts as playful debate slowly hardens. The host's laughter fades, replaced by careful pauses. Viewers can almost feel the temperature change as Leanne realizes she is no longer telling jokes, she is defending herself. Joy presses further, framing Leanne's comments as outdated or disconnected from modern realities. Leanne tries to respond calmly, reminding everyone that comedy comes from lived experience. Her voice stays steady, but her eyes reveal frustration. She explains that not every perspective is meant to offend, and that intention matters. The audience murmurs softly, sensing that this exchange is no longer about humor, but about who gets to define what is acceptable on national television. That discussion becomes more personal when Joy questions Leanne's audience and what they represent. Leanne visibly stiffens, feeling that millions of people who relate to her work are being dismissed. She takes a breath, choosing her words carefully, explaining that her fans are everyday people who laugh to survive hard lives. The moment feels raw. Cameras linger on her face, capturing the strain of someone pushed beyond polite disagreement into emotional defense. As interruptions pile up, Leanne finally pushes back. Her southern charm sharpens into something firmer, her tone still respectful but unmistakably resolute. She tells Joy that talking over someone is not the same as winning an argument. The studio falls quiet. Even the co-host seems surprised by the sudden shift. This is no eruption of rage, but a controlled release of long-held frustration that demands to be heard. Joy responds with sarcasm, and that is when Leanne's patience snaps. She raises her voice slightly, not yelling, but speaking with clarity and conviction. She says she came to share laughter, not be lectured or reduced to stereotypes. The words hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. Audience members lean forward, sensing they are witnessing a rare unscripted moment where civility and confrontation collide live on air. Leanne continues, explaining that disagreement does not require disrespect. She challenges the idea that one worldview automatically makes someone ignorant or harmful. Her speech flows, passionate yet grounded, like a stand-up monologue turned serious. The irony is not lost on viewers that a comedian is now delivering one of the most sober statements of the episode. Her authenticity resonates far beyond the studio walls. Joy attempts to redirect the conversation, but the momentum has shifted. Leanne is no longer simply responding, she is reclaiming control. She talks about growing up, about faith, family, and learning empathy before judgment. Her voice cracks slightly, revealing vulnerability beneath the strength. The audience applauds softly, not in celebration, but in recognition of honesty. This is the eruption everyone will talk about, not loud, but emotionally seismic. Other hosts try to mediate, reminding both women of time constraints and differing perspectives. Leanne nods, acknowledging the effort, but insists on finishing her point. She emphasizes that comedy should unite, not be weaponized. Her words feel like a plea for balance in a media landscape addicted to extremes. Even those who disagree with her cannot deny the sincerity pouring through every sentence. Joy fires back once more, defending her stance with trademark bluntness. The clash of personalities becomes the heart of the segment. Leanne listens, arms folded, then responds calmly, saying that strong women can disagree without tearing each other down. That line lands hard. It reframes the confrontation, shifting it from ideology to mutual respect, or the lack of it. The studio audience reacts audibly now, some cheering, others gasping. Producers likely panic behind the scenes, but they let it run. This is the kind of television that cannot be manufactured. Leanne's eruption is not chaos, but clarity. She speaks for people tired of being caricatured. The cameras capture every reaction. Knowing this clip will travel far beyond the original broadcast, as the segment nears its end, Leanne softens her tone. She says she respects Joy's career and voice, but asks for the same respect in return. It is a disarming move, turning confrontation into an invitation. For a brief moment, the tension eases. Joy nods, though her expression remains guarded. The air feels heavy, but calmer, like a storm that has finally passed. The show cuts to commercial shortly after, leaving viewers buzzing with unanswered questions. Social media, in this imagined scenario, would explode within minutes. Clips would be shared, paused, analyzed frame by frame. Supporters on both sides would claim victory. Yet the true impact lies not in who won, but in the raw exposure of how fragile televised civility can be. Back from break, the mood is noticeably restrained. Leanne sits quietly, hands folded, while the hosts attempt lighter conversation. The contrast is stark. What was meant to be entertainment has become something closer to a cultural mirror. The laughter feels forced now, the earlier joy replaced by reflection. Leanne smiles politely, but the fire in her eyes has dimmed into exhaustion. In this dramatized aftermath, commentators would later say Leanne handled herself with grace under pressure. Others would argue she crossed an invisible line. The truth likely sits somewhere in between. What cannot be denied is that her eruption struck a nerve. It revealed how quickly dialogue can turn into confrontation when empathy is replaced by assumptions. For Leanne, the moment becomes defining. Fans praise her courage, saying she spoke what many feel but fear expressing. Critics accuse her of oversensitivity, yet she remains consistent, stating in interviews that standing up for oneself does not equal hostility. Her message stays the same: disagreement is human, but dismissal is harmful. Joy, too, would address the moment, framing it as healthy debate. In this imagined narrative, she insists that tough questions are part of the show's DNA. The difference in interpretations fuels the controversy. Viewers pick sides, hashtags trend, and the clip becomes symbolic of a broader cultural divide playing out on daytime television. The imagined confrontation highlights the power imbalance of panels and platforms. Leanne, a guest, faces a host on her home turf. Her eruption, therefore, feels risky and brave. It challenges the expectation that guests must remain agreeable at all costs. That alone makes the moment resonate, especially with audiences who feel unheard in their own lives. Over time, the intensity of the moment fades, but the conversation it sparked lingers. Media analysts dissect body language, tone, and word choice. Fans revisit the clip, noticing details missed before. The eruption becomes less about anger and more about boundaries. Leanne's stand serves as a reminder that politeness should not require silence. In the broader cultural context, this story fits into ongoing debates about free expression, comedy, and respect. Leanne's hypothetical outburst symbolizes pushback against rigid narratives. Joy's challenge represents the insistence on progress and accountability. Neither side is entirely wrong, which is why the clash feels so compelling and unresolved. The imagined legacy of the moment is complex. It is replayed in montages, referenced in think pieces, and cited in discussions about talk show ethics. Leanne's calm yet firm eruption becomes a case study in emotional authenticity. It shows that passion does not have to be allowed to be powerful. Fans of Leanne feel closer to her after the incident, believing they saw the real person behind the punchlines. Her vulnerability strengthens her bond with her audience. She continues touring, joking about everyday life, but with a new edge of seriousness woven subtly into her humor. Meanwhile, The View continues as it always has, thriving on debate. The imagined confrontation becomes one of many in its long history, yet this one stands out for its emotional honesty. It reminds viewers why they tune in, not just for agreement, but for friction that reflects real conversations happening off-screen. In retrospect, the eruption is less about anger and more about identity. Leanne defends who she is and who her audience is. Joy defends the show's mission to challenge. The collision of those goals creates sparks, illuminating the difficulty of balancing inclusion with critique. This dramatized story ultimately underscores how television moments can transcend their original intent. What begins as a talk show segment morphs into a cultural talking point. Leanne's words echo beyond the studio, resonating with people who feel judged before understood. The confrontation also raises questions about tone policing, especially toward women. Leanne's firm response is labeled an eruption, while similar behavior from others might be called assertive. That double standard becomes part of the discussion, adding layers to the narrative and deepening its impact. As time passes, the imagined incident settles into pop culture memory. New controversies arise, but this one is remembered for its emotional clarity. It is cited whenever discussions turn to respect, dialogue, and the limits of civility on television. Leanne, reflecting later, would say she does not regret speaking up. In this version of events, she emphasizes that silence would have felt like self-betrayal. Her eruption, controlled and heartfelt, becomes an act of self-respect rather than rebellion. Joy, equally steadfast, maintains that tough conversations are necessary. The unresolved tension between their perspectives becomes the point. It mirrors society itself, divided yet interdependent, arguing loudly while sharing the same space. In the end, this full story is less about who said what, and more about why it mattered. Leanne Morgan's imagined eruption on The View symbolizes a moment when politeness cracked and truth spilled through. Whether praised or criticized, it leaves an imprint, reminding audiences that real emotion, even uncomfortable, is what makes conversations unforgettable. In the days following the imagined broadcast, entertainment blogs dissect every second of the exchange, slowing clips and amplifying facial expressions as if they hold hidden meaning. Comment sections turn into battlegrounds where viewers project their own experiences onto Leanne's words. Some say they finally felt represented on daytime television, while others argue the moment exposed how fragile open discussion has become when emotions override listening. What resonates most in this extended aftermath is how quietly powerful Leanne's stance feels compared to louder televised confrontations. There is no table flipping or walk-off, only a woman refusing to be minimized. That restraint becomes central to her supporters' praise, framing the eruption not as a loss of control, but as a refusal to shrink for the comfort of others. Media psychologists weigh in, suggesting that audiences responded so strongly because the moment mirrored conversations happening in homes and workplaces. Leanne's calm insistence on being heard reflects a universal frustration. People see themselves in her pause before speaking, the breath taken before pushing back, the courage required to challenge someone with institutional authority. In this dramatized narrative, fellow comedians quietly express solidarity. They understand the pressure of being labeled while expected to entertain. Some mention that comedy stages feel safer than talk show couches, where humor can be reframed as ideology. Leanne's eruption, therefore, becomes symbolic of a larger industry tension between creative expression and cultural gatekeeping. Late-night hosts reference the clip in monologues, joking lightly but acknowledging its seriousness. Humor becomes a coping mechanism for a moment that cut deep. Even in satire, the underlying respect for Leanne's composure remains. The laughter does not erase the discomfort, it simply helps audiences digest it. Viewers who initially disagreed with Leanne admit, over time, that her delivery forced them to reconsider assumptions. The lack of hostility in her voice complicates easy dismissal. She did not attack, she explained. That distinction becomes crucial, demonstrating how tone can transform confrontation into conversation, even when agreement remains elusive. The imagined eruption also sparks discussion about generational divides in media. Leanne's storytelling roots contrast sharply with Joy's sharper political commentary. Their clash highlights how different eras communicate conviction. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but their collision exposes how easily intent can be misread across generational lines. Some critics argue the show should have intervened sooner, while others praise the decision to let the moment breathe. In this version of events, producers later admit they recognized authenticity when they saw it. Manufactured drama fades quickly, but genuine emotional exchanges linger, and this one carved out a lasting place in viewer memory. Leanne's touring material subtly evolves after the incident. Without naming names, She jokes about being talked over and learning when to stop smiling. Audiences laugh, sensing the truth beneath the humor. Her comedy deepens, enriched by lived confrontation, proving that difficult moments can become creative fuel. Academic commentators reference the clip in discussions about media ethics and guest dynamics. The power imbalance of hosts versus visitors becomes a focal point. Leanne's Eruption is cited as a rare example of a guest successfully reclaiming narrative control without theatrics or cruelty. Over time, the outrage cycle slows, replaced by quieter reflection. The clip resurfaces occasionally, often when similar debates arise. Each time, viewers notice something new: a pause, a glance, a word emphasized. The richness of the moment lies in its layers, not its volume. In Imagine interviews, Leanne says the hardest part was knowing millions were watching while she chose honesty over comfort. That admission humanizes her further. The eruption was not rehearsed bravery, but spontaneous self-respect, making it relatable to anyone who has ever spoken up despite fear. Joy's defenders emphasize her role as a challenger, someone tasked with asking uncomfortable questions. That framing adds balance to the narrative, preventing it from becoming a simple hero versus villain story. The confrontation works because both women are strong, articulate, and unwilling to retreat. Ultimately, the extended story transforms into a lesson about dialogue. It suggests that eruption does not always mean explosion. Sometimes it is a crack in the surface, allowing buried truths to escape. Leanne's moment stands as proof that firmness and kindness can coexist, even under scrutiny. As this imagined chapter closes, what remains is not anger, but resonance. Leanne Morgan's Eruption on The View becomes a touchstone for discussions about respect, voice, and the courage to remain oneself under pressure. Long after the cameras stop rolling, the echo of that moment continues, shaping how audiences think about conversation itself. As weeks pass in this imagined timeline, the moment is slowly absorbed into the larger rhythm of pop culture, yet it refuses to disappear completely. Viewers revisit it during quieter news cycles, not because of shock value, but because it captures something honest. Leanne's words feel less like a viral clip and more like a memory people return to when they need reassurance that speaking calmly can still be powerful. Cultural commentators begin comparing the exchange to older television moments when guests challenged hosts respectfully. The contrast highlights how rare such exchanges have become. Leanne's Eruption is framed as a throwback to dialogue-driven television, where people stayed seated, spoke fully, and allowed discomfort without immediately retreating into outrage or applause cues. In fan communities, the conversation evolves from defense to introspection. Supporters ask themselves why Leanne's response felt so validating. Many conclude it is because she modeled self-advocacy without cruelty. That balance becomes aspirational, especially for people who feel unheard in polarized environments where raising your voice often seems like the only option. The imagined clip also finds its way into workshops and media studies classes, analyzed for pacing and emotional intelligence. Students note how Leanne pauses, breathes, and chooses language that centers experience rather than accusation. Her eruption becomes a practical example of how emotional control can amplify, rather than dilute, a message. Meanwhile, casual viewers who initially missed the episode encounter it later through commentary videos. Removed from the live context, the moment feels even more intimate. Without studio energy, Leanne's sincerity stands out. The delayed discovery proves that authenticity has a longer shelf life than shock, quietly gathering new audiences over time. Some critics revisit their initial reactions and soften their stance. Distance brings clarity. They acknowledge that while disagreement remains, the manner of Leanne's response deserves respect. This shift illustrates how first impressions, shaped by headlines, often fail to capture the nuance revealed through reflection. The imagined confrontation also prompts conversations about how women express anger publicly. Leanne's measured tone challenges stereotypes, showing that eruption does not require loss of composure. Her example expands the definition of strength, particularly for women expected to either stay agreeable or be dismissed as emotional. In this ongoing narrative, Leanne never capitalizes aggressively on the moment. She does not merchandise it or sensationalize it. That restraint reinforces the authenticity people sensed from the start. Her silence on self-promotion speaks as loudly as her words on the show once did. Joy's role in the exchange continues to be debated, but even critics concede that without her pushback, the moment would not exist. The tension between them becomes a reminder that friction, while uncomfortable, can produce clarity. The value lies not in harmony, but in honest engagement. As the story ages, it becomes less about personalities and more about principles. Respect, listening, and boundaries emerge as the core themes. Leanne's eruption is remembered not as defiance, but as definition, a moment where she defined herself on her own terms before millions. Viewers begin referencing the clip in everyday conversations, saying things like "that Leanne moment" to describe calm firmness. It enters casual language as shorthand for standing your ground without hostility. Few television moments achieve that level of cultural shorthand, especially without spectacle. In imagined retrospectives, broadcasters cite the episode as proof that audiences still crave substance. Ratings spikes fade, but trust builds. The segment's longevity becomes evidence that viewers remember how moments make them feel more than how loud they were. Leanne herself remains unchanged publicly, continuing to speak about kindness, humor, and resilience, yet those who watch closely sense growth. The eruption did not harden her, it clarified her boundaries. That quiet evolution resonates deeply with longtime fans. Over time, the confrontation is no longer replayed for drama, but for guidance. People watch it before difficult conversations, studying tone and timing. Leanne's composure becomes instructional, a reminder that conviction paired with respect can hold a room. In the final reflection of this imagined full story, Leanne Morgan's eruption on The View stands as a moment of emotional literacy on television. It shows that speaking up does not require burning bridges, and that sometimes the most unforgettable moments are born not from chaos, but from courage spoken calmly. As the months roll on, the conversation surrounding the confrontation shifts toward a more nuanced understanding of the dynamics at play. Television analysts begin to point out the power of nonverbal communication in the interaction. Leanne's body language, steady and composed, acts as a silent counterbalance to the sharper tones around her. Viewers begin to appreciate how physicality can convey as much, if not more, than words. In social media spaces, memes begin to emerge from the episode, but not the kind of viral, exaggerated moments that typically spread. These memes highlight quotes from Leanne's dialogue, like "I came here to share laughter, not be lectured," or "disagreement doesn't mean disrespect." The quotes are shared with sincerity, framed not as comebacks, but as affirmations of personal boundaries. Behind the scenes, the production team quietly acknowledges the impact of the segment. The producers express surprise at how deeply the moment resonated with viewers. What they thought would be a standard interview has become a cultural milestone. They are now faced with the reality that their show has captured something far more profound than they intended, a turning point in how difficult conversations are viewed in mainstream media. In the coming months, The View adapts slightly, incorporating more guest-focused discussions that allow for longer exchanges. It's clear the producers are learning from the moment, not in a way that compromises the show's format, but in a way that recognizes how important it is to respect the voices of guests. While the show remains as outspoken as ever, there is a subtle shift toward more balanced dialogue. Leanne's publicists use the fallout to frame her as a voice of reason, not only in comedy but in everyday life. In interviews following the incident, she continues to emphasize the need for vulnerability and communication. She speaks openly about the toll that constant scrutiny takes, and how standing up for yourself is an essential part of both personal and professional growth. As the original broadcast grows older, YouTube channels dedicated to media analysis create in-depth breakdowns of the confrontation. These videos examine every pause, every shift in tone, and every subtle shift in power dynamics between Leanne and Joy. They delve into the psychology behind the eruption, exploring how people react under pressure. And while Leanne's poised response continues to captivate audiences, the debate over comedy's role in society is reignited in intellectual circles. As Leanne's words resonate with those who believe humor should push boundaries without alienating people, Leanne herself is invited to panels and discussions about the intersection of comedy and culture, where she articulates a vision of humor that is both empathetic and sharp, a tool for connection, not division. In universities, the incident is discussed as a case study in media ethics. Students explore the balance between holding guests accountable and providing them a platform for self-expression. The moment becomes an example of how talk shows can serve as spaces for constructive disagreement, rather than just spaces for conflict-driven spectacle. The conversation begins to expand beyond comedy and talk shows, touching on the broader issue of cancel culture. Leanne's eruption, in this context, is seen by some as a stand against the rapid judgment that people, particularly public figures, face. Her stance encourages a reevaluation of the speed with which society condemns individuals, advocating instead for nuanced dialogue before conclusions are drawn. Leanne's interaction with Joy Behar is also re-examined in the context of gender dynamics. The idea that Leanne, a woman, could challenge another woman so directly without resorting to emotional outbursts resonates with many who see it as a powerful reclamation of space. The exchange defies expectations of what women should sound like when they disagree, offering a model of measured yet assertive confrontation. As Leanne continues her comedy career, her new material subtly reflects the lessons she learned from the eruption. She begins incorporating stories of standing up to authority figures in her Tania stories of conflict. Yes, but ones that always land with a sense of resolution. Fans note that her humor has deepened, becoming more reflective and layered. It's as though she has found new strength in the complexities of her voice. The lasting impact of the moment also creates an interesting dialogue about the role of television in shaping public opinion. Some argue that shows like The View should allow for more emotional outbursts, seeing them as genuine reactions to the world. Others argue for the necessity of maintaining civility in such public forums. Leanne's eruption becomes a key example of why this tension exists and why it matters. As her public persona matures, Leanne becomes a voice in conversations about social media. She openly discusses how platforms tend to amplify extremes and reduce complex people into sound bites. Her confrontation with Joy Behar, she notes, would have been a very different story if social media had been the only lens through which it was viewed. She advocates for nuance, for listening, and for giving people the space to explain themselves without fear of immediate backlash. Leanne's story becomes a cultural touchstone, not just for its content, but for its timing. In an era where cancel culture, political divides, and constant media scrutiny have created an atmosphere of heightened tension, her eruption is remembered as a turning point where someone chose to stand firm in their truth, unafraid to address uncomfortable issues, but always with respect. It's a lesson in bravery and balance. Media analysts observe that the moment also reflects a generational shift in how people engage with television. As younger audiences increasingly reject scripted conflict and embrace genuine emotion, Leanne's response strikes a chord. Her refusal to perform for the camera, her choice to engage in a real conversation rather than a forced spectacle, appeals to an audience tired of being fed manufactured drama. The backlash that initially followed the eruption slowly gives way to a more balanced discussion. Some critics still argue that Leanne should have handled the situation differently, but the majority of the conversation shifts toward admiration for her ability to remain composed. It becomes clear that her eruption was not the explosion of uncontrolled rage that some had painted it to be, but a controlled outburst driven by authenticity and self-respect. Leanne continues to expand her reach, not just as a comedian but as a cultural commentator. She participates in podcasts, interviews, and roundtables where she reflects on the intersection of comedy, gender, and public life. Her voice becomes one that helps define what it means to stand up for yourself in a world that often demands silence from women, especially in the public sphere. In the long run, Leanne's eruption on The View is credited with sparking a broader conversation about how people can disagree without descending into personal attacks. It becomes a touchstone for discussions about the power of civility in conflict, reminding people that standing your ground is not about fighting, but about finding common ground through mutual respect. As time passes, Leanne's moment becomes an iconic example of how television can be a platform for real, human emotions, moments of true, unscripted feeling that resonate far beyond the broadcast. It's a reminder that the best conversations don't always come from consensus, but from honest engagement, no matter how uncomfortable it may seem. In the years following the incident, Leanne Morgan's words continue to echo in the way people engage with media. The message is simple but profound: it's okay to disagree, to speak your truth, and to challenge without resorting to disrespect. Her eruption becomes a symbol of the strength that comes with choosing not to be silenced, and her legacy as a voice of reason and emotional clarity in a tumultuous media landscape is firmly cemented.